to MRD Chatroom. This is an exciting time for us. I am Gloria A. Haynes, and we are going to be up close with educator, author, playwright. She is really a Barbadian, and she will tell you a little bit more about herself, but we want to welcome to MRD Chatroom Miss Fern Best. Welcome, Fern.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Fern, you would have authored a couple of books, and I know you are excited as a Barbadian living in Canada to come to be a part of this initiative in collaboration with the National Task Force on Literacy. But tell me a little bit, who is Fern Best?
Who is Fern Best? Fern Best is a mother, wife, educator, because in every opportunity there is something to learn and something to teach. I fell in love with theater at a very young age. So I was always interested in not just being front stage, but backstage. And the passion was creating those stories. So I live in a world where I hear something and a story comes to mind, or a theme for a story, or a character for a story comes to mind. And that's Fern. I love to laugh, I love to joke around, but I'm also very, very serious when it comes to my work. And when I'm working, as in focusing on a book or a play or a script, you have to be quiet because my thoughts need space to move. So that's Fern in a nutshell.
Beautiful. So tell me a little bit about your Barbadian background before we move into your stories.
Well, my primary, secondary education, St. Stephen's Primary, and then the Alexandra School. And I think I went on to the University of the West Indies from there. But while there, I was actually doing a law degree. That was what I was intending to pursue. And I got a call from the Ministry of Education. I had submitted an application, I don't know how long ago, and they said they needed someone to temp for somebody for a month. It was September, so someone got ill, a teacher got ill, and they needed someone to temp for this teacher for a month. And I remember I wasn't that interested in going. Teaching was not really the career path for me, but I did go. And I got stuck there in a good way for about 15 years. And I thoroughly enjoyed every aspect of it, especially working with the little ones, the 4 to 5, the 5 to 6, the 6 to 7. Those are the ones who could imagine and recreate and give you lots of information to work with so that you could create a program, a lesson that would just engage them from the very beginning. So that's where I got my start. As a teacher in Barbados, my biggest or longest appointment was with the Hinesbury Primary School, and that was under the tutelage of Marcia Rose at that time, Marcia Graham now, and it was just a wonderful experience. I came in at a time where there were older teachers, and I was able to learn from them. And then with my aptitude and my love for theater and drama in education, I was able to bridge the two together so that they got that good old time teaching, but with a new twist.
Thank you so much, Fern. This is so exciting. And I love that you can still remember those experiences in Barbados. I
miss them dearly.
Beautiful. But when did you start your writing?
You know, I was trying to think about a particular age where I could say I started writing. What came to my mind was a particular time. I was an avid reader. I read everything from the cornflakes box to my mother's love sweats and mills and wounds that she had hidden in her closet. And when all those were gone, I started asking for paper and pencils and crayons and markers and pens so that I can write my own stories. So I think from very young, I was writing stories, but I think it came together As a teacher in that primary setting, where there were lots of textbooks, and although they were trying to cater to um, young students, they didn't always cater to the lesson plan that I was intending for my students, what I wanted them to learn, my objectives. And I would write my stories, write my own stories. So instead of having them to go to a book to do a comprehension passage, we would create a story or a poem or a dramatic piece together. And this in itself would teach some of the concepts that we were trying to teach. I remember in asking for reviews from my website from some of my teachers, and one of them said, everything with Fern is a production. Even the simplest lesson was a production. And I think that was it for me. I would write these stories. I sometimes would try to pull them together to create something. They would often get lost. I would give them away. But then when I got here in Canada, I wanted my children to feel comfortable in the environment that they were in. And there were lots of Asian children in the environment where I was in, and I wanted them to be part of that. And I remember I purposely joined the parents committee. And at one of these committees, I heard one of the teachers saying, oh, I have to look for a play for the children this year. And she was thinking of buying a play. And I was like, you buy that? Like, I can write this for you tonight. And I did that. And they absolutely loved it. And that play was actually the Annalisa book that we're going to talk about. That was book one. And I wrote that for them, and they absolutely love it. It was well received. The children loved it. It was very engaging. The adults loved it. And from there, I said, well, I'm not going to stop now. I'm going to continue writing. And I penned a couple of ideas for books. And as I get time, I would sit and I would write. And then I have these two.
Beautiful. So I know you just said you have these two, and I believe that you're talking about your two books, Annalisa and 0054. Can you tell me what was the inspiration for these books?
Well, I started with 0054, and at Christmas time, I'm not so much sure how much it shows on TV in Barbados, but for sure, cable TV and international TV, there are these ads around Christmas time where they're asking for donations for like children's hospitals, sick kids and whatnot. And they were always very, very, very touching. And that struck a chord with me. And I remember a time when my sister was ill and she had to go to the hospital. I think she spent like a week there. And my mom would cry every time we left. She would cry because she's leaving her baby in the hospital. But I remember going back the next day and my sister would say to me, oh, we had ice cream. Oh, we had a pajama party. Oh, we did this. And so the concept for 007 came out of that, because here are these children who are ill, who are trying desperately to figure out what's happening with them and not being able to really articulate how they're feeling. But they understand that it affects their parents. They understand that it affects the people around them. But at the same time, they have to live, and they're finding a way to be kind and be loving and, encourage those persons around them. So that was the background for 0054. As I mentioned before with Annalisa, this story, The Lost Children of Hamelin, was part 2 to the Annalisa saga. Annalisa is a character where she moved from Yukon to Markham, and although it was one country, the way she dressed was differently, the way she spoke was different, and she wanted to feel she was all ready to make friends, but the people there didn't like her. They kind of rebuffed her, but she had to find a way into their hearts. And the story with The Lost Children of Hamelin came around trying to create something new, because creation is not just coming up with a whole new concept. You can blend old and new. And I asked around and I was asking people, do you know the story of the Pied Piper? And most of them said no. It's like, well, where did I go to school that I know the story of the Pied Piper? I'm not that old, right? And then I was able to say, well, let's give this old fairy tale a new twist with Annalisa being the lead character.
Right. So I know you spoke a little bit about the Pied Piper. What were some of the other characters? I believe I would have seen that you brought a number of childhood characters into this
Oh,
one
yes.
story. So can you tell me a bit about that story, Annalisa? I know that you would have developed the storyline and the characters and so on. So tell me a little bit about those characters that you would have included in Annalisa.
So if you think of a Wizard of Oz situation where you find yourself in a new place, Annalisa found herself in Storyland. And in the initial story, she landed in this house. And this girl was in this house changing curtains and fixing chairs. And then the bears came home, right? So I incorporated as many stories, old fairy tale stories as possible. So that was Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And she was able to learn a little bit even from Goldilocks herself. And then she met up with Pinocchio, and she met up with all these other storyline characters. And she was able to learn something from them. And the end of that first story, the storyline characters were no longer just simple Goldilocks who broke into the bear's home. She's an interior designer now, and Cinderella was not just the girl who cleaned her parent the household anymore, or even married the prince. She has a whole line of clothing for ball gowns so that every girl could go to the king's ball. So it's just about being able to kind of bridge the old with the new and take those old fairy tale characters and introduce a new character to them to give them a new spin.
Would you say that the story Annalisa was biographical in any way? Was it your autobiography, I should ask? Would you
Well,
say?
I didn't
Yeah.
think about it as my autobiography, but the main character was based on I was thinking about my daughter at that time. So we moved from Barbados, hot, beautiful Barbados, and we came to Canada. She didn't make that choice. That choice was made for her. And she had to navigate this new environment, new people, the way they dress, being able to put on your snow pants and your jacket and not lose your gloves, for goodness sake, those things.
Yes.
And you can't fret too much because it wasn't what she was accustomed to. But she was able to make friends in that environment so quickly. Like, I really admire the fact that we Bajans tend to just adapt to situations that
Yes.
quickly. And I remember they were going to the same elementary school. My daughter at that time, and my son is about 4 years older. And he said he saw a group of people in the corner, and immediately he thought something was wrong with my sister. I have to go save her. But when he went to try to save her, she was the ringleader in the group. So
Okay.
he was like, I don't have to worry about her. She's gonna be fine. She's gonna be fine. So yeah, I think it was based on her, just getting people to realize that because you may look differently, because you speak differently, it doesn't mean that you are different at heart, and that you can open your mind and just be understanding about those differences.
So, what is your favorite character, or who are your favorite characters in each story, and why have you chosen those characters?
It's funny because you would figure that the main character would be my favorite character, but in each of these books, it was the supporting character that really, I think, I saw myself in, and because they were either very dramatic or very naughty in a sense. So in the first book, 0054, with the
Yes.
children in the hospital, the main character is Fuchsia. And the supporting character, one of the supporting characters, is a young lady called Phantom. And she was given this name because she was able to literally break into just about any room within the hospital. So if you were hungry, she was able to find you food. If you were trying to get to another ward without being caught, she was able to get you there. And she was given that nickname Phantom. And Phantom was the naughty one of the group, so to speak. And she was, like she was the one that would encourage them to do things maybe that they shouldn't do, but it was all for a good cause. And then with Annalisa, the Lost Children of Hamelin, the main character, of course, is Annalisa. But she has this extra dramatic friend called Eliza. And Eliza was that one that was ready to faint when anything happened, was ready to run at the slightest provocation. She was the one that would say to Annalisa, this isn't looking right. She is the first one to, she was the one that would give you the laughs and the background and the energy to want to continue reading. So Annalisa was the sound one, and she was the little crazy one there that, when you have friends and best friends, there's always one that is sound and is going to make rational decisions, and then there's the other one. So for these two, the favorite characters are always some of the secondary characters.
Okay. So now that you've shared some of the exciting elements of the story and your storyline, can you share a few excerpts from 0054, one or two excerpts so we can get a gist? I know that people have to buy your book and you don't want to give it all away, but I'm sure you will want to excite them so that they would want to buy your book. So I'd like you to share at least two extracts from 0054 and another two extracts from Annalisa.
Okay, so 0054, one of the first parts of the book that I think even other people who would have read it, because although they're children books, trust me, I have adults who call me and say to me, I read the book. I waited until my daughter was asleep or my son was asleep and I read the book. And there were a few things, even if they were not exciting in the traditional sense, they were extremely touching. And one of them was the chapter 1 in 0054, when Fuchsia, first came to the hospital. And the scene is that they've been waiting for the doctor. She hasn't been feeling well, and that they've been waiting for the doctor. And I'm going to read this part for you. It says, "You have to leave now if you're going to pick up Draymond on time, Mom." "I'll be all right," Fuchsia said, with as much cheer as she could muster. "I know, but I don't want to leave you alone," her mom replied. "Don't worry, Dad will be here soon and I'm going to sleep anyway. See you when you get back." And with that, Fuchsia closed her eyes and pretended to sleep. Her mom kissed her on her forehead, squeezed her hand, and then tiptoed out of the room, wiping her eyes. When the door finally closed, Fuchsia opened her eyes and resumed looking at the car park. There were pigeons and blackbirds flying about, with a few squirrels racing up and down the trees. How free they looked, and not at all tired like she was. And what struck me about this as I was writing it was because I don't think a lot of adults understand that children have these big feelings that they can't articulate. Yeah. Because as much as she wanted her mom, and I've been in that situation, not in the hospital, but with other things, as much as you wanted your mom to be there and you wanted that support, you knew that she had to work. So you had to pretend, even if you weren't, to be okay, so that she would leave, so that she would go. And when even reading this now, what came to my mind was my graduation from primary school. And my mom and my dad both had to work. And I was saying to them, no, you don't have to be there. It's okay. You don't have to be there. But once at the graduation ceremony, I realized how sad I felt because they weren't there. And if I had asked, they would have been. But I pretended that it was okay so that they wouldn't feel bad, so that they would go. And I think a lot of the times adults don't realize how the roles that children put themselves in so that they can feel better. I know the adults do it all the time. We do it for our children, but children do it also. So sometimes you have to watch that to make sure and let them know, this is my job, you don't worry about this. I'll take care of this one. The second one from 0054 was the chapter where that dealt a little bit about death. And it's a difficult topic to write about. And it's an even more difficult topic to have a conversation with a child about. So this particular chapter took me a while to just to get it right. What is happening is that they met this older gentleman, and they got a message that he wasn't doing well. And Phantom was able to sneak them throughout the hospital, through closets, through whatever, to get them there. And then when they got there, the room was silent, and all they could hear was the machines going. And he looked quiet, his eyes were closed, and everybody else was afraid to even touch him. And Phantom went up to him and said, "Hey, Mr. Neil, it's me, Phantom. And his only request was he wanted to do these things before he died. And so it was a bucket list that they were trying to figure out, how are we going to fulfill this bucket list for him, right? And I remember one of them was he wanted to go fishing. And they were like, how do we get this older man out of the hospital on a lake to go fishing? But then they came up with these creative ideas. Somebody used virtual reality game to let them pretend that they were fishing, and they were pretending to catch fish, and the whole thing. But eventually they got news that Mr. Neil had died. So I'll read this part for you. That night, 0054 held their own little memorial for Mr. Neil. Fuchsia read his story that she had compiled to the others. It spoke about growing up on a farm with stern parents and being laughed at because he always smelled like the farm. It also spoke of him being studious, getting a job in the city, working hard to buy a house, and sending his children to the best schools. The main theme was him missing his wife when she died, as well as the opportunity to see his grandchildren, and how proud he was of all of them. They put the painting that they did on the wall. It was entitled In Remembrance. It was of a boat in the middle of the ocean, just as the sun was setting. They smiled, remembering their pretend nautical adventure. As they said a prayer for Mr. Neil's family, they opened their eyes. The reality of their existence dawned heavenly on them. Could one of them be next? Fuchsia pictured herself in this painting in the middle of the ocean, being lulled to sleep by the gentle waves. The vigil was interrupted by a sudden idea from Phantom. We should all create a bucket list and keep in touch with the promise to meet if any one of us should call. As they went off to their separate beds with pen and paper to create their bucket list, Fuchsia began to think about what she would want on her bucket list. Trips to Disney World, skydiving, and being an actor in a movie did not seem so important to her now. She looked around. Everyone was still up. I have another idea, Fuchsia said out loud, breaking the deafening silence. Instead of a bucket list, we should promise that when we grow up, we would have careers helping sick children so that they could feel the same sense of family that we have created here. Everyone agreed. Fuchsia quietly said a prayer before bed and asked God to be with my family at home and her new hospital family. As she began to drift off, a sense of calm came over her, as a clear direction came to her mind of what she wanted to be when she grew up. If you grew up, the voice in her head countered. And that struck me, that part, because a lot of the times we don't say it out loud, especially if you're in a situation like this where you don't know if there's a tomorrow. But for a child to have that understanding that she might not grow up, but she's still willing to, if she does grow up, spend her life trying to recreate this family environment that she has found herself in, I think was so powerful. And although it was a difficult topic altogether, it brought a calming reassurance to the end of that particular chapter. But it left that question mark, if she grew up.
Thank you so much. And that was 0054, and
That was
I'm sure
0054.
there are a lot of lessons you can learn from reading these books. And so, but what about those extracts from Annalisa? You would like to share at least one? We can
Annalisa,
share at least one of them, and just let us know
yes.
what drove you to that particular one.
Annalisa was fun to write. I think for most people, they come up with a story idea and probably draft their story idea. I think it's probably because of my background in theater. I think of script ideas. I think I see the story before I even start to write the story. And for this one, for Annalisa, the Lost Children of Hamlin, I'm going to go to page 13. And this is as they've been approached by the characters in Storyland to help the lost children of Hamlin. And they found themselves in a new environment that they've never seen before. It says, Annalisa immediately began, sorry, not Annalisa. Annalisa jumped up and looked around. The bush was gone, as was Lake Kasawa. All they could see were odd little houses down in the valley. Eliza immediately began clicking her heels. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. Oh no, not again, Annalisa wailed. There's no place like home. There's no place like home, Eliza tried again, this time closing her eyes tightly and clicking her heels even harder. Oh, stop that, Annalisa snapped. Your name is Eliza, not Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. I don't care what my name is, as long as I can go home, Eliza shouted, dropping to her knees dramatically. Well, we're here now, wherever here is, Annalisa responded, trying to lift Eliza's limped body. So we might as well find those lost children. We are the lost children, Annalisa. Isn't there a saying about the lost leading the lost? Eliza wailed. That's the blind leading the blind, and we're going to help those children somehow, Annalisa responded, though she looked doubtful. Let's start by finding civilization. There were some houses over there. At least I think there were houses. Maybe there's someone there who can help us, Annalisa said as cheerfully as she could manage. With Eliza finally on her feet, the two friends sat across the plains towards the houses in the distance, and Eliza complaining every other step about her shoes, the mud, and the mosquitoes. Finally, they reached the little settlement. So to me, this little quick little excerpt just gives you a quick idea about the differences between the two characters.
Yes.
That one character who's willing to do whatever it takes, but then there's the other over dramatic character who always tailspins into this dramatic meltdown. And I think even throughout the story, she was the one that kept things going, right? So that was an excerpt from Annalisa, The Lost Children of Hamlin.
Thank you so much. And Fern, we are now on the brink of education transformation, and we are also very strategic and very intentional about literacy in Barbados. So I want you to give, if you were to give some advice to teachers, what advice would you give to teachers? Because we know that literacy it can be very difficult in Barbados in terms of children who are not interested in reading or they cannot read. So what advice would you give to teachers? That's the first question. And what advice would you give to children reading these stories who will want to write their own? Now I've given you two questions, and I know that will be a mouthful. So you're gonna advise our teachers and then you're gonna give some advice to our children.
I think the advice to teachers is generally understand the whole gamut of what literacy encompasses. And I think, yes, the main focus is on getting those children to read eventually, but the methodology that you employ does not have to be the old, here's the book, sit, call those words, and if you run into trouble, let me know so I can give you the word. It is attacking those words from the very beginning. So, and I always start with my little ones in the reception class. They come in, a lot of them are not, they can't read traditionally as yet, but you're now introducing letter sounds to them. You're now introducing the phonics to them. And within that, you want to create And like I said, everything is a production. So you want to make sure that you integrate this into every single lesson. So if I'm dealing with, let's say, letter A, that letter A is going to be in my English lesson. I'm going to look at letter A in my math lesson, whether it is counting, we identify A for apple or whatever the case, if we're counting apples or we're counting A's. We want to make sure that we employ all those different levels of comprehension. So we don't just want them to recall a letter or recall a word. We want them to be able to differentiate those letters between A and a C or A and a D, which is one of the most difficult ones for that age group. And then you want to be able to integrate that into everything, even in terms of making sure that you incorporate some drama, some singing. I remember my class was the noisiest class in the whole of Hinesbury Primary School. I had a drum, and even if we were doing nursery rhymes or whatever, we would sing, we would dance, we would keep a whole lot of noise, but it was working noise, as I would like to call it, because they were learning. And I think for teachers, it's just about incorporating that aspect, making literacy your focus within every subject matter. And then that translates into how we assess literacy as well. And the only way is not for you to stand and remember doing this as a child, and they give you a passage and they say, read that, and then we're going to test you. It is about interacting with the story, interacting with whatever is happening that you are using to assess them. And so your assessment sometimes has to be a little different, because if you're going to use theater in education, if you're going to use drama in education, music in education, your assessment can't be a written one, right? And this goes throughout all facets of the school. So maybe we have to look a little bit too at how we assess the level of literacy. So that's just my little gamut for teachers. I mean, there's a whole lot more that goes with that, because it's not just that lesson plan that I'm planning a whole unit, and all those units link, and all those different links eventually lead to one particular objective. So your objectives have to be very clear, and you have to be able to articulate that objective. And I should be able to see from the lesson plan straight into your unit plan how you're going to meet those objectives. And that's my little tidbit for teachers. I'm sure they do this already, but I think a lot of the times that because it's done in such a dry environment, you need to make sure that they're singing, they're laughing, they're playing. Play is a key way for especially younger children to learn, and make sure that you use a lot of that within your classroom. And then for children who are looking to write, understanding that it doesn't happen all at once, right? It doesn't happen all at once. You don't have to write a story in one day and make it the perfect story. So if it starts by you drawing a picture, the pictures that you think would be able to represent this story, and you're telling me the story. And I loved that, especially for the younger ones. I force them to pick up a paper and try to fit what they're thinking into on a piece of paper. Tell me the story. And you'll realize you get a different response when they're telling you the story and they're comfortable and they're dramatizing this story for you. And sometimes they're singing it. Coming here has even taught me a lot, even with my own daughter. And like, there are many times where she might struggle with reading something or putting letter sounds together to form particular words or whatever the case may be, but she's very oral. So if your assessment may not be to write a story the first time around, it could be for you to tell me the story. They gave her an option and she chose to do a podcast. And I'm going like, the girl got talent. You're like, she gets that from me maybe, but like that. So those kind of things come in. So creativity comes in different ways, and write it down. Tell the story, record it, and then write it down. Because many times children are very articulate, but because they can't put it on paper, and it stops the flow of your creative ideas. And I even remember that with my daughter, like she could talk you around the world, but then if you ask her to write something, I was happy Today was a good day. It's like, there are other words that you can use. Why are you still using these words? Because she can spell them, right? Those were the ones that she can spell. And we are so particular in Barbados, and I'm sure in the Caribbean, but you have to get the words correct. Allow them to do inventive spelling. Allow them to do that. If they know what it is, that's all that matters for now. And then, but that you build on that as they go on. So children, write it down, create your stories. If you want to record your story, record your story. If you want to draw your story, draw your story. If you want to act your story out, act your story out. And eventually you would gain the skills that you can write your story down. And even when you write it down, it's not done. You process that. You edit and you keep going and you refine the characters and you refine the scene and you refine the scenario, right? So bear in mind that it doesn't all happen at once. Take your time. You have lots to learn and you have lots of time to make that story the best story that it could possibly be.
Fern, I can hear your passion, and you can probably talk about your stories, and you can probably talk about all of these methods for a whole day. But what's next for Fern Bess?
What's next for Fern Bess? The thing about me is that I find that my mind has to be quiet for me to write. So if there's a lot going on, I tend not to do as much writing. In terms of books, I already have a draft for something that I got really excited about. And it's incorporating those infamous characters of Barbados. And I've always wanted to write stories about these infamous characters of Barbados. And I never got the opportunity to. I would do a lot of it come social studies time or independence time within the schools. But then here, I'm telling my daughter about Ninja Man or Sam Lords or Bussa, and she doesn't know these stories. So then I started trying to put it in a way that was not just child friendly, but was entertaining and kind of a blend of histories, right? So I have one with Ninja Man is the main character of the story, and she visited Barbados just this summer, and like she's like, I need to go see Ninja Man. It's like, girl, you don't book an appointment with Ninja Man. It doesn't work like that, right? So these are the things that I'm working on. So far I've done that. I've done Middle Cut, he's in there. I've done Professor, he's in there. I've done, and I'm sure people will be listening like, who's these people? But if you lived around the city, and I got my details like from my husband's mother was an older lady, and she lived in Bush Hall, and she could tell me why Middlecut got his name, those kind of things. And I learned from these people. So then things that you would read what the history book says about Bussa, but like, what was the backstory? Like, how could you imagine this or reimagine this story? So I have lots of those kind of characters there, and I'm really excited about that. I'm hoping for that to be out by Independence next year.
Awesome. So, Fern, it has been a pleasure speaking with you today, and this has been MRD Chatroom. And I don't know if you have any closing remarks before we wrap up, but this has been an exciting time as you discuss your books, Annalisa and 0054. Any closing remarks for us?
Encourage your children to read. Encourage them to read. Encourage them to read. Because I know for a fact that there were words and terms and terminology that I would never know had I not been an avid reader. And I remember being little and thinking that, I remember writing the word barricade. I was probably like 6 years old in a story. And the teacher's like, where did you find this word? You were cheating or something. And I was like, no, I thought that was my word, but I had read it somewhere. You don't know where knowledge is going to come from. So encourage them to read, find out what their interests are, and find stories that align with those interests. And even if they can't find the stories themselves, encourage them to create their stories. And we're not looking at their spelling. We're not looking at the structure. We're looking first and foremost at that creative piece. And it's that creative piece that if you can harness, that would allow them to integrate and be even more literate beings in the future.
Thank you so much. So, on behalf of the National Task Force on Literacy Education, Dr. Sylvia Henry, and we want to thank you also on behalf of the Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training. We want to thank MRD as well. And this has been MRD Chatroom in collaboration with the National Task Force on Literacy Education. And we were up close with Fern Best, educator, author, playwright. Have a wonderful evening.